On our anniversary, my daughter-in-law mocked me over password. My revenge exposed her fraud empire. "Honey, your mother changed the password to her account. Now I can't even buy a cabinet." The desperate shout from Diana pierced the phone like a poisoned dagger, landing directly in my son Thomas's ears. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard those words that would shake the foundations of our family. 20 minutes later, the front door of my house burst open and my own son stormed in like a raging tempest. "Mom, give me that damn password right now!" he roared as his fists slammed against my face with a violence I never thought he would use against the woman who gave him life. His eyes, once full of filial love, now burned with a blind fury fueled by his wife's manipulative tears. But he had no idea of the consequences that awaited him after that moment, a moment that would mark the end of our relationship forever. My name is Lillian. I am 67 years old, and all my life I have been what people call a hard-working woman with a good heart. Since the age of 15, I dedicated myself to sewing, creating beautiful dresses with these hands that now trembled from the shock of the assault. In my small workshop, which I set up in the garage, I would craft wedding gowns with golden and silver fabrics, party dresses in coral and fuchsia shades, garments that carried the love and dedication of decades of experience. Every stitch was a prayer, every hem, a promise that honest work would always be rewarded. For 42 years, I was married to Robert, a good man who worked in construction. Together we raised Thomas, our only son, giving him all the love and all the values we believed were right. I was respected in the neighborhood. Ladies came to my workshop not only for my skills with the needle, but also for my life advice. "Mrs. Lillian always knows what to say," they would comment as I adjusted their dresses or repaired their husbands' clothes. My reputation extended throughout the area. Mothers of brides traveled from distant towns to have me make the most important dress of their daughters' lives. But at home, especially after Thomas married Diana 3 years ago, my opinion began to be worth less than the dust on the floor. My daughter-in-law arrived with honeyed smiles and sweet words, calling me sweet mommy and hugging me every time we met. At first, I thought I was lucky that my son had found a loving woman who would treat me like a second mother. How wrong I was. She was an accomplished actress capable of changing masks whenever it suited her. When Robert died 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack, my world collapsed. Not only did I lose the love of my life, but I discovered something I never imagined. We had more money saved than I thought. Robert had been very discreet with finances, saving every extra penny in an account I did not know about. When reviewing the papers with the lawyer, I learned that I had almost $120,000 between savings and life insurance. It was a fortune for a woman like me, accustomed to counting every coin. At first, that money gave me peace of mind. I knew I could live out the rest of my days with dignity, without depending on anyone. But Diana had other plans. It started with small and seemingly innocent requests. "Sweet mommy, can I borrow your card to buy a few little things for the house? Thomas's salary just isn't enough for us this month." Her eyes would fill with fake tears as she talked about the financial difficulties they faced as a young couple. I, with a soft heart and wanting to help my son, handed her the card, thinking she would buy the basics: food, cleaning products, perhaps some necessary clothes. But the few little things for the house quickly turned into a leather sofa for $3,000, a glass dining table for $2,500, luxury appliances that cost more than my entire house. When I checked the bank statements, I almost fainted from the shock. "Sweet mommy, we just want to make our home beautiful for when we have babies," Diana would tell me in that angelic voice she had perfected to manipulate me. Her hands would stroke my arm as she showed me furniture catalogs that cost more than a seamstress's annual salary. "You know how important it is to have a nice environment to raise children, right?" And I, like a fool, would nod, thinking of the future grandchildren who would fill my life with joy. How blind I was to her tricks. The first few months after giving her access to my card, I tried to convince myself that it was normal for a young couple to want nice things. But when I saw that in a single month she had spent $8,000 on what she called basic decor, I knew something was terribly wrong. The red velvet sofa she bought cost more than what I earned in 6 months of work. The crystal chandelier in the dining room was worth the same as my professional sewing machine, the one it had taken me years to save up to buy. I decided to talk to Thomas, thinking he might be able to reason with her. "Son, I think Diana is spending too much," I told him one afternoon while we were having coffee in my kitchen. But instead of the understanding I expected, I saw his face harden. Mom, my wife has good taste. What's the problem? It's your money, but it's also our future. You don't want your son to live well? His words hurt me more than any insult. It was as if I was no longer his mother, but an obstacle between him and the luxurious life Diana had promised him. That night, lying in my empty bed, I began to notice other strange details that I had ignored before. Diana always had perfectly manicured nails. She carried expensive designer bags that I recognized because some wealthy clients had shown me theirs. Her clothes were brand new every time I saw her. Silk dresses in golden and silver tones, shoes that sparkled like jewels. For a woman whose husband worked in a warehouse earning barely $1,200 a month, she was living too well. One morning, while cleaning my workshop, I found a receipt that had fallen out of Diana's purse during her last visit. It was from a very exclusive beauty salon downtown, the same one where the wives of the area's wealthiest businessmen went. The facial treatment she had gotten cost $400. $400 for a single session, the same amount I charged for making an entire wedding dress, working for days. I began to investigate discreetly, reviewing the bank statements more carefully. What I discovered made me tremble with indignation. Not only was she buying expensive furniture, but she had been funding a lifestyle completely beyond their real means. 5-star restaurants appeared on the bills, luxury hotels where she stayed with Thomas on weekends, purchases at stores where a simple blouse cost more than many families' monthly rent. But what bothered me the most was discovering that she had been lying about everything. She had told Thomas that I gave her money voluntarily because I wanted to spoil him, when in reality she took my card without my full knowledge of the amounts. She had created a version of reality where I was the generous mother-in-law financing her whims, while to me she presented herself as the humble daughter-in-law, only asking for help for the basics. The final straw came when my neighbor Angela told me something that broke my heart. "Lillian, I saw your daughter-in-law the other day showing off to her friends at the shopping mall," Angela said. She was saying she had the perfect mother-in-law who gave her money without asking questions and that she would never have to work because you supported her like a princess. Angela's words echoed in my head for days. I had become the butt of her friends' jokes, the foolish old woman funding the luxuries of an unscrupulous girl. That same week, I decided to take control of the situation. I went to the bank and changed the password to my account. I also canceled the card Diana had been using and requested a new one only for myself. The bank employee, an older woman named Martha, looked at me with understanding when I explained my situation. "Mrs. Lillian, you are doing the right thing to protect your savings. I have seen many cases like yours, and they never end well if limits aren't set in time." Leaving the bank, I felt for the first time in months that I had regained some control over my own life. I would no longer be the silent victim of my daughter-in-law's abuse, but I had no idea of the storm that would unleash when Diana discovered that her days of reckless shopping had ended. The beast I had been feeding with my generosity was about to show its true claws. The first sign that Diana had discovered my decision came barely 2 days later. I was sewing a kimono dress in purple and gold tones when my phone rang. It was her, but her voice no longer held that feigned sweetness that had fooled me so much. "Sweet Mommy, I went to buy some little things and the card isn't working. Is there a problem with the bank?" Her tone was cautious, as if she was testing the waters before attacking. "Yes, Diana, I canceled that card," I replied with all the calm I could muster. "I think it's time for you to learn to manage your own expenses." The silence that followed was so icy, I could feel it through the phone. When she finally spoke, there was no trace of the affectionate daughter-in-law I knew. "How could you do this to me? I am part of your family. We need those things for the house." I patiently explained that I had reviewed the expenses and that they were not things for the house but unnecessary, luxuries that were draining my life savings. "Diana, in 3 months you spent more than $25,000. That's more than many families earn in a full year. It's not fair or reasonable." But she didn't want to listen to reason. She only shouted that I was selfish and that I was ruining her life. That afternoon, Thomas came to visit me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a child having tantrums. "Mom, why did you take Diana's card away?" She was so sad, crying all morning because she says you no longer trust her. I felt as if I had been slapped. My own son was defending his wife's abuses without even asking me for my side of the story. "Son, she spent $25,000 in 3 months, I told him, showing him the bank statements I had printed especially for this conversation. "Look, Everything is detailed here. Furniture that costs more than my house, incredibly expensive beauty treatments, restaurants where a dinner costs $300. But Thomas barely looked at the papers before pushing them away with contempt. Mom, you have a lot of money and we are just starting our life together. Isn't it natural for a mother to want to help her son? Dad would have wanted us to be happy. Those last words were like a dagger in my heart. He was using the memory of Robert, my dear husband, to justify the systematic theft of our savings. Your father worked 40 years to save that money, I replied, my voice breaking with emotion. Every penny represented hours of his life under the sun, building houses for other families while we lived on the bare minimum. That money is not for whims. It's for my old age, for medical emergencies, for having dignity in my last years. But Thomas had already been completely poisoned by Diana. You are selfish, Mom. You have so much money, and you don't want to share even a little bit with your only family. Diana was right when she said you had become cheap since Dad died. His words were like sharp knives cutting through my soul. The woman who had worked since she was 15 to give him everything was now called cheap by the son she had raised with so much love. For the next few days, the harassment was constant. Diana would call me several times a day, alternating between dramatic pleas and veiled threats. Sweet mommy, please. I just need $1,000 for the dining room sofa. I promise it's the last thing I'll ask for. And when I refused, her voice would turn ice cold. I hope you don't regret this decision, Lillian. Family is the most important thing, and you are destroying ours. She also started sending me pictures of furniture and decorations via text message, accompanied by manipulative captions. Look how beautiful this dining set would look in our house. Robert would have wanted Thomas to have nice things. Each message was a reminder of how she had managed to turn my son against me, using the memory of my late husband as an emotional weapon. One night, while reviewing the invoices from my workshop to calculate my monthly income, I realized something chilling. Diana's expenses had not only been excessive, but they followed a very specific pattern. She always bought 2 of everything: 2 sofas, 2 dining sets, 2 large-screen televisions. At first, I thought maybe she returned one and kept the other, but when I investigated more deeply, I discovered something much worse. My neighbor Angela, who worked as a cleaning lady in the fanciest sector of the city, told me something that chilled my blood. Lillian, I saw some of those furniture pieces your daughter-in-law buys at the Miller family's house, the one where I work on Thursdays, she said. The lady told me a young woman had sold her an almost new leather sofa for half the price, and when she described it, it was identical to the one I saw at Thomas's house. The terrible truth began to take shape in my mind. Diana was not only spending my money on unnecessary luxuries, but she was buying expensive items with my card to later sell them for cash. It was a perfect scheme. She used my money to buy merchandise, sold it for half the price, getting cash that I could never track, and kept the profits for her personal expenses. That revelation filled me with a fury I had never felt in my life. She had not only robbed me, but had made me an unwitting accomplice to an elaborate fraud. Every piece of furniture she bought with my money ended up in other people's homes while she pocketed the cash. She was worse than a common thief. She was a professional con artist who had used my son's love as leverage to destroy my life savings. I decided it was time to take more drastic measures. I could not allow this woman to continue destroying everything that Robert and I had built with decades of honest work, but I had no idea how far Diana would be willing to go to defend her source of illicit income, nor of the violence she would unleash when she discovered that I had caught on to her true game. I decided I needed concrete evidence before confronting Diana directly or talking to Thomas again. All my life I had been a woman who preferred facts over rumors, and this situation would be no different. I started my investigation as an amateur detective, taking advantage of the fact that my age made me invisible to most people. No one suspects an elderly lady with a sewing bag asking seemingly innocent questions. My first stop was the furniture store, where Diana had bought the famous $3,000 sofa. I presented myself as a worried grandmother seeking information about a purchase my granddaughter had made. "Excuse me, miss," I said to the saleswoman. "My granddaughter bought a red leather sofa here a few weeks ago, and I need to know about the warranty." The girl, very kind, checked her system and not only confirmed the purchase, but showed me a picture of the product. "Oh yes, I remember that customer," she said, smiling. "Very elegant. She bought 2 identical sofas on the same day. She said one was for her and the other was a gift for her mother-in-law. Wasn't that thoughtful?" I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. 2 identical sofas, each for $3,000, bought with my money, and I had never received any gift. It was confirmation that my suspicions were correct. Following the trail, I visited other stores where purchases appeared on my bank statements. In every place, the story was repeated. Diana bought luxury items, always in duplicate, claiming one was a gift or for another room. Salespeople remembered her well because she paid the differences in cash when the prices exceeded the card limit, which meant she had access to considerable amounts of cash. Angela helped me investigate the second-hand market where her niece worked on weekends. "Aunt, there is a young woman who comes every week selling expensive, almost new furniture," Angela's niece told me. "She always says she's moving or changed her mind about the decor. The prices she asks are very good, half of what they cost new, so they sell fast." When she described the seller, I had no doubt it was Diana. Long, wavy hair, always well-dressed with perfect nails and an arrogant attitude. She says her husband works for a decorating company, and that's why she has access to so much nice furniture, the girl added. Another lie in Diana's arsenal to justify her illicit business. I decided to go personally to the second-hand market the following Saturday. I disguised myself as best I could, wearing a gray wig I had bought years ago for a neighborhood play and dark sunglasses. I wanted to see with my own eyes how Diana operated her clandestine business. I did not have to wait long to find her. There she was in a bright yellow dress I hadn't seen before, selling a glass dining table that I immediately recognized from my bank statements. It cost $2,500 new, and she was offering it for $1,200. "It's imported from Italy," she told an interested couple. "My designer mistakenly got me 2, and I don't need both. It's a bargain you won't find anywhere else." I watched for 2 hours as she sold item after item, all bought with my money, not just furniture, but also appliances, expensive decorations, even jewelry that had been charged to my card as family gifts. Her technique was impeccable. She invented convincing stories for each product, mixing half-truths with elaborate lies and always maintaining a charming smile that reassured the buyers. What impacted me the most was seeing her count the money at the end of the day. Thousands of dollars in cash that she stored in a gym bag as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Money that had originally come out of my bank account, transformed into luxury items and then reconverted into cash that she completely controlled. It was a perfect money laundering scheme, using my card as the initial source and my ignorance as a protective shield. On the way back home, my mind was working at full speed, processing the magnitude of the deception. She wasn't just a spendthrift daughter-in-law. She was a professional con artist who had identified the perfect victim in me, an elderly widow with considerable savings and a manipulable son whom she could use as an emotional intermediary. She had studied my weaknesses, outlined a plan, and executed it with surgical precision. That night, alone in my house, I calculated the real losses. In 6 months, Diana had spent approximately $45,000 of my savings, but if she was selling everything for half the price, that meant she had generated at least $22,000 in cash that I would never see. Money she was probably using to maintain her ostentatious lifestyle, or saving for some future plan that did not include my family. I decided to confront her with the evidence, but I needed to do it intelligently. If I accused her directly, I knew she would deny everything and use Thomas as a human shield. I had to find a way to expose her without giving her time to create new lies or manipulate my son further. But before I could plan my strategy, Diana took the next step in her escalation of manipulation. The next day, I received a call from Thomas that chilled my blood. "Mom, Diana is in the hospital. She says she felt unwell from the stress of all this conflict with you, and the doctors are worried." His voice sounded genuinely distressed, and for a moment, I doubted my own conclusions. Was it possible that I was being unfair to a girl who truly loved my son? But when I arrived at the hospital, Diana's performance was so exaggerated that it confirmed all my suspicions. She was lying in bed in a pink silk hospital gown that she had obviously brought from home, crying perfect tears that didn't ruin her makeup. "Sweet Mommy, forgive me if I offended you," she whispered weakly. "I just wanted our house to be perfect for when we had babies. I never meant to hurt you." The doctors, after examining her, confirmed what I already suspected. She was physically fine. "It's emotional stress," the young doctor attending her explained. "She probably needs to resolve some family conflicts to feel better." Diana had turned the hospital into her stage, using the medical environment to lend credibility to her role as a misunderstood victim. That night, while Thomas stayed to care for his dramatist wife, I made the hardest decision of my life. I could not continue to be the silent victim of this woman. I had to expose the truth regardless of the consequences for my relationship with my son. Robert had not worked 40 years for a con artist to destroy our family legacy with lies and manipulation. The morning after the hospital drama, I decided it was time to take definitive action. I had spent the entire night awake, planning every step as if it were a chess game, where my opponent already had an advantage. I knew Diana was an expert manipulator. But I had something she didn't expect, the determination of a woman who had worked all her life and was not willing to be robbed by an unscrupulous actress. My first stop was the bank, where I requested an appointment with the manager, Mr. Robert Miller, a middle-aged man who had known my financial situation since Robert and I were young clients. "Mrs. Lillian, I have reviewed your account, and indeed there have been very irregular movements in recent months," he confirmed while checking his computer screens. "These spending patterns do not match your history over the last 20 years. I explained the entire situation in detail, showing him the photos I had discreetly taken at the second-hand market and the receipts I had collected from the stores. Robert listened with professional attention, taking notes in a notebook. "What you are describing constitutes credit card fraud and possible money laundering," he told me seriously. "We can initiate a formal investigation, but you will need to be willing to file an official complaint." "Mr. Miller, that woman has destroyed my life savings using my own son as an emotional accomplice," I replied, my voice firm despite the pain I felt. "My husband worked under the sun for 40 years to accumulate that money. I cannot allow a con artist to squander it on whims while acting as an innocent victim." The manager explained the legal process. We would have to document every fraudulent transaction, gather evidence of the resale of merchandise, and prove that the expenses had been made without my full knowledge of their true purpose. "It's a solid case, Mrs. Lillian. These buy and resell schemes using other people's cards are more common than you imagine, especially when they involve family members who can easily access financial information." As I left the bank with the necessary documents to file the complaint, my phone rang. It was Thomas, and his voice sounded angrier than ever. "Mom, did you go to the bank to badmouth Diana?" the manager called, asking about irregular transactions. "How can you do this to your own family?" The speed with which that information had reached him confirmed that Diana had contacts in unexpected places or had simply managed to manipulate even the bank staff. "Son, I went to protect the money your father and I saved for decades," I explained patiently. "Your wife has spent more than $40,000 in 6 months and is reselling everything she buys. That's not being generous with the family. That's being systematically robbed." But Thomas no longer wanted to listen to reason. He only shouted, defending the woman who had poisoned his mind against his own mother. "You are a bitter old woman who can't stand to see her son happy," he yelled at me with a cruelty I had never heard in his voice. "Diana is right. Since Dad died, you became selfish and cheap. I wish you had never had that money." His words were like stabs, each one more painful than the last. The son I had raised with so much love now hated me for protecting the inheritance that would one day be his. That afternoon, while organizing all the evidence on my dining room table, I received an unexpected visit. It was Diana, but she no longer came with her mask of a sweet, manipulative daughter-in-law. Her face showed a calculating coldness that made me understand she had finally decided to drop all disguises. "We need to talk, Lillian," she said, entering my house uninvited, using my first name without the affectionate sweet mommy she had faked for years. "I know you went to the bank, and I know you've been investigating my purchases," she continued as she sat on my sofa as if she owned the place. "But before you do something stupid, I want you to understand the consequences of your actions." Her voice had a threatening tone that made my skin crawl. This was the real Diana, the one who had been hidden behind fake smiles and crocodile tears. "Thomas doesn't know anything about my little side businesses," she explained with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He genuinely believes all the furniture we bought is in our house, and that you give me money because you love me like a daughter. If you destroy that image, you not only hurt me, but you destroy your own son's innocence. Do you really want him to know that his wife is a con artist?" It was a perfect emotional blackmail. Diana had built her scheme in such a way that exposing the truth would hurt Thomas as much as it hurt her. My son would have to face not only that his wife was a criminal, but that he had been her unwitting accomplice, defending her against his own mother while she systematically stole the family savings. Furthermore, Diana continued, getting up and walking around my living room like a predator stalking its prey, I have been very careful with my methods. Technically, you voluntarily gave me access to your card. I can prove that every purchase was authorized by you, that I never stole anything directly. In the worst case, it would be a family misunderstanding, not a crime. Her words made me understand that I had severely underestimated her criminal intelligence. She was not just an opportunist taking advantage, but a professional con artist who had studied every legal angle of her scheme. She had built her defense from day one, ensuring that if she was discovered, she would have arguments to escape legal consequences. But I am reasonable, she said, stopping in front of my chair and looking down at me with superiority. We can reach an agreement that benefits everyone. You give me complete access to your account again, and I make sure Thomas never knows the truth about what really happened to your money. We will continue to be a happy family, and no one gets hurt. But the proposal was diabolical in its simplicity. Turn me into a conscious accomplice to my own robbery in exchange for maintaining family peace. Diana was offering me the opportunity to be robbed with dignity without scandals or confrontations, only the slow agony of watching my savings disappear while pretending to be the generous mother-in-law financing the whims of a con artist. And if I refuse? I asked her, though I feared the answer. Her smile became even colder, if that was possible. If you refuse, I will tell Thomas that you have been harassing me, that you threatened me, that your obsession with money has made you paranoid and aggressive. He is already predisposed to believe me after all these months of preparation. You will become the villain of this story, the toxic mother-in-law who destroyed her son's marriage out of greed. It was the perfect checkmate. Diana had so skillfully manipulated the situation that any move I made would result in my own destruction. If I exposed her, I would hurt Thomas and he would hate me for ruining his marriage. If I confronted her without enough evidence, she would paint me as the crazy villain obsessed with money. If I gave in to her blackmail, I would lose everything Robert and I had worked to build. But there was something Diana didn't know. A woman who had survived 67 years, who had raised a son alone while working, who had faced the death of her husband and rebuilt her life, would not surrender so easily to a 30-year-old con artist. The war was just beginning, and I had some cards she was not expecting. I need time to think about your proposal, I told Diana with the calmest voice I could muster, though inside I felt like a volcano was about to erupt. She smiled with satisfaction, believing she had won the game. Of course, sweet mommy, she replied, returning to that false diminutive that now made me nauseous. But don't take too long. Patience is not one of my most developed virtues. After she left, I sat in my armchair for hours looking at the evidence scattered on my dining room table. Photos, receipts, bank statements, notes from my investigations. Everything seemed insignificant compared to the web of manipulation Diana had woven around my family. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she had made a crucial mistake. She had underestimated the determination of a desperate mother. That night, I called Angela, my neighbor and only confidant in this nightmare. Angela, I need your help with something very important, I said. Can you come to my house early tomorrow? We are going to set a trap that Diana will never see coming. My friend, who had witnessed all the abuse I had suffered in recent months, immediately agreed. Lillian, it's about time that girl got what she deserved. The next day, Angela and I executed the first phase of my plan. She headed to the second-hand market where Diana regularly sold, pretending to be a buyer interested in specific decor items. I am looking for a red leather sofa and a glass dining table, she told Diana when she found her at her usual stall. A friend told me you have very nice things and at good prices. While Angela kept Diana busy, I went to the house my son shared with his wife using the emergency key Thomas had given me months ago. I needed to document exactly what furniture was actually in their home versus what appeared on my bank statements. What I found exceeded my worst expectations. The house was practically empty. The famous $3,000 sofa was not there, nor the glass dining table, nor most of the expensive appliances I had paid for. In their place were cheap, used pieces that definitely did not justify the astronomical expenses on my card. It was definitive evidence that Diana had been buying luxury items to resell them immediately. I took detailed photos of every room, documenting the real poverty of their decor in contrast to the luxuries I had financed. In the bedroom, I found something even more revealing. A shoebox full of cash, thousands of dollars in bills organized by denomination, the direct product of her fraudulent sales. It was more money than Thomas earned in several months of work. But the most shocking discovery was hidden in the bedroom closet. Behind Diana's clothes, I found a folder with documents that made me understand the true magnitude of her criminal plan. She wasn't just robbing me. She had been investigating other potential targets, elderly widows with considerable savings, information about their families, their emotional weaknesses. Among the papers, I found a notebook with handwritten notes that chilled my blood. Lillian, sentimental widow, single, manipulable son, approximately $120,000 in savings, no financial experience. There were other similar entries about older women in the neighborhood, all described as potential victims with details about their vulnerabilities and financial resources. But what most disturbed me was finding a detailed plan for the next phase of her scam. Diana did not plan to settle for robbing my savings. She intended to convince me to grant her legal power over my finances, claiming I was losing my mental faculties due to age. She had researched dementia and Alzheimer's, preparing to use my supposed mental incapacity as justification for taking complete control of my estate. I photographed every document with my phone, making sure to capture every last detail of her criminal plan. It was more than enough evidence to prove that she was a professional con artist with multiple potential victims, not a careless daughter-in-law with family expenses. When I returned home, Angela had already returned from her mission at the market. "Lillian, you are right about everything," she confirmed with indignation. "That girl offered me exactly the furniture that appears on your bank statements. She even showed me photos on her phone of other items she would receive next week. It is a completely organized operation." That afternoon, I put together a complete file with all the evidence: photos of the empty house, documents of her criminal plan, records of her sales on the black market, statements from witnesses who had seen her operations. It was a case so solid that even a novice lawyer could win in any court. But before proceeding legally, I decided to give Diana one last chance to confess and return the stolen goods. I called her and asked her to come to my house that evening to discuss her proposal in more detail. She arrived punctually, dressed in a purple silk suit that she had probably bought with my money, radiating the confidence of someone who believes she has definitively won the game. "I hope you've made the right decision, Lillian," she said, sitting comfortably on my sofa. "After all, family is the most important thing. Isn't that right?" Her fake smile made me nauseous, but I maintained my composure. I needed her to confess everything before showing my cards. "Before deciding, I have a few questions," I said, feigning weakness and indecision. "How can I be sure you will keep your part of the agreement? How do I know you won't continue to spend uncontrollably?" Diana relaxed even more, interpreting my questions as signs of surrender. "Look, Lillian, I'll be honest with you," she said with a condescending tone she would use to talk to a small child. "I'm not like the women of your generation, settling for a simple and boring life. I have refined tastes and big ambitions. Your money allows me to maintain the lifestyle I deserve, and in return I keep Thomas happy and your family united." "And what about all that furniture you buy?" I insisted, feigning innocent curiosity. Her smile became even more arrogant. "Well, I don't need to keep everything forever. If I sell a few things from time to generate some extra cash, what's the problem? It's money you are going to give me anyway." It was the complete confession I needed. Diana had admitted not only the systematic theft, but also the fraudulent resale and her completely contemptuous attitude towards me and my money. But I still had one more card to play before revealing all my evidence. "What if I died tomorrow?" I asked her in a trembling voice. "What would happen to Thomas?" Her answer confirmed that her plans were even more sinister than I had imagined. "Oh, don't worry about that. I've already talked to Thomas about the importance of giving me legal power over your finances in case something happens to you. He understands that a woman your age needs help managing such large amounts of money." The coldness with which she spoke about my death and the appropriation of my inheritance made me understand that I was dealing with a complete sociopath. Not only did she see me as a source of money, but she was already planning my total replacement in the family finances. It was time to show her that the foolish old woman she had been robbing for months had more up her sleeve than she had ever imagined. "Diana," I said slowly, rising from my chair and walking towards the table where I had prepared my arsenal of evidence. There's something I want to show you before I make my final decision." She followed me with her eyes, still relaxed and confident, without imagining that she was about to see her whole castle of lies crumble. I began by spreading out the photos I had taken in her house that morning on the table. Her face gradually changed from curiosity to alarm as she recognized the images of her empty rooms. "What is this, Lillian?" she asked with a tense voice, losing for the first time that arrogant composure she had maintained for months. "These are photos of the house you live in with my son," I replied calmly, enjoying watching her pale. "The house that is supposedly full of the expensive furniture you bought with my money. Where is the $3,000 sofa, Diana? Where is the glass dining table? Where are all those luxury appliances?" Diana tried to maintain her facade, but I could already see the cracks in her armor. "Some are at the repair shop," she stammered. "Others I temporarily moved to." Her voice trailed off as I continued placing evidence on the table like a prosecutor presenting their case. "To the Miller family's house, perhaps?" I interrupted, showing her the photos Angela had discreetly taken at the second-hand market. "Or maybe to the Vasquez house, where my friend recognized the crystal chandelier you bought for $1,200 and sold for $600. The color completely left her face when she saw the images of herself selling my furniture on the black market. It was impossible to deny the photographic evidence of her criminal operation. "Lillian, I can explain all this," she tried to say, her voice broken. But I was not finished. "Can you also explain this?" I asked her, placing the copies of the documents I had found in her closet on the table. Her eyes widened as she recognized her own handwriting describing my profile as a potential victim. "Or perhaps you can explain why you have detailed information about other widows in the neighborhood, including data on their savings and emotional weaknesses." Diana abruptly stood up, knocking her chair backward. There was no trace left of the confident woman who had entered my house an hour before. "You had no right to enter my house," she screamed, finally showing her true personality. "That's invasion of privacy. That is illegal." "Do you know what else is illegal, Diana?" I replied, keeping my voice calm while she lost control. "Credit card fraud, financial fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit further fraud. Each of these documents is evidence of federal crimes that can send you to prison for several years." Her mask of civility completely collapsed. It was like watching an actor remove their makeup after a performance, revealing the real and despicable face that had been hidden. "You are a stupid old woman," she yelled at me with venom in every word. "I thought you could be reasonable, but you are too stubborn and selfish to understand when someone is doing you a favor." "A favor?" I repeated incredulously. "Robbing me of $45,000 is doing me a favor?" Her laugh was harsh and cruel, completely different from the melodious laughs she had used to seduce my son for years. "That money was wasted on you, an old woman who lives like a beggar, having a fortune in the bank. At least I put it to productive use, generated jobs, moved the economy. You just had it rotting there like a pathetic miser." Her words confirmed what I already suspected. She did not feel an ounce of remorse for what she had done. To her, I was not a person with rights, but an obstacle between her and the money she believed she deserved. It was the mentality of a complete sociopath, incapable of empathy or moral responsibility. "Besides," she continued with a malevolent smile, "do you think Thomas is going to believe you over me? I've spent 3 years building our relationship, filling his head with stories about how selfish you've become since Robert died. He loves me more than he ever loved you." That last sentence was designed to hurt me in the deepest part of my heart, and it succeeded. But it also gave me the final strength I needed to do what I had to do. "You are right about one thing, Diana," I said, walking towards the phone. "Thomas believes you more than he believes me. That's why I am not going to ask him to choose between us." "What are you doing?" she asked me with increasing alarm as I dialed a number I had written down on a piece of paper. "I am calling the police," I replied simply. "And then I am going to call the district attorney. I have enough evidence to prosecute you for multiple federal crimes." Diana lunged towards me, trying to grab the phone, but I quickly stepped away. "You're crazy. You are going to destroy your own family. Thomas will never forgive you." Her screams became more hysterical as she realized she had lost all control over the situation. "Emergencies! How can I help you?" the operator answered. "I need to report financial fraud and credit card fraud," I said clearly. "I have the suspect in my house right now and complete evidence of multiple crimes. As I gave my address and briefly explained the situation, Diana ran around my living room like a caged animal. "You can't do this to me. I have rights. I am part of your family." But her protests only confirmed to the operator that the situation was real and urgent. "I'm going to tell Thomas that you threatened me," she screamed in desperation. "I'll tell him you physically attacked me, that you are losing your mind." But it was too late for her manipulations. The evidence spoke for itself, and there was no longer any way to twist reality in her favor. When she heard the sirens approaching, Diana did something I never expected. She ran to my kitchen and returned with a butcher knife in her hand. "If you are going to destroy me, I am taking you with me," she screamed, her eyes bloodshot, all her civilized composure completely evaporated. "Diana, put that knife down," I told her, trying to stay calm as I backed toward the door. "You're only making your situation worse." But she was beyond any reasoning, consumed by the rage of seeing her perfect plan crumble. 3 years planning this. 3 years tolerating your boring son and your stupid comments, all for a nosy old woman to ruin everything. She brandished the knife erratically without a clear target, but clearly dangerous. The knocking on the door grew louder. "Police. Open the door." Diana turned toward the sound with the knife still raised, her mind clearly malfunctioning under pressure. It was the most dangerous moment when a cornered criminal could make completely irrational decisions. "She's in here!" I yelled toward the door. "She has a knife." The sound of the door being forced open was immediately followed by authoritative voices ordering Diana to drop the weapon. Her reign of terror had come to an end, but the consequences of her actions were just beginning to unfold. "Drop the weapon immediately and put your hands where we can see them," shouted the officer who led the group of police who had burst into my living room. There were 3 uniformed officers, all with their weapons drawn and pointing directly at Diana, who continued to brandish the knife with erratic movements and bulging eyes. "She's setting me up," Diana shrieked, not letting go of the knife. "She's a crazy old woman who hates me because her son loves me more than her. This is all revenge." But her hysterical appearance, with disheveled hair and makeup running from tears of rage, contrasted dramatically with my calmness, as I remained pressed against the wall, out of her reach. "Ma'am, I need you to put the knife down right now," insisted the senior officer, a man in his 40s with a firm but controlled voice. "We don't want anyone getting hurt here." His training was evident in the calm manner with which he handled the situation, but everyone could see that Diana was on the verge of a complete mental collapse. "I'm not going to jail for this miserable old woman," she yelled, turning the knife toward her own chest. "I'd rather die than let her destroy me." It was a typical theatrical move of her manipulative personality, but the officers could not risk it being a genuine gesture of self-harm. "Diana, please," I said from my corner, trying to use the maternal tone that had worked in the past. "Think of Thomas. He needs you alive, not dead. Drop the knife, and we can resolve everything like civilized people." But my words only seemed to infuriate her more. "Don't talk to me about Thomas. You destroyed everything. He was perfect for my plans until you became suspicious." Her involuntary confession that she had used my son as a tool for her scams was clearly heard by everyone present, including the officers who began to exchange meaningful glances. Finally, after several minutes of tense negotiation, one of the younger officers managed to get close enough to disarm her from a blind spot. The knife fell to the floor with a metallic sound that echoed throughout the house, immediately followed by the sound of handcuffs closing around Diana's wrists. "This isn't over," she yelled at me as they cuffed her. "Thomas will never forgive you for this. You are going to die alone and bitter, exactly as you deserve." Her threats and curses continued as they led her toward the patrol car, but I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months. Detective Ryan Harrison, who had arrived shortly after the uniformed officers, sat down with me on my sofa to review all the evidence I had collected. He was a middle-aged man with clear experience in financial fraud cases, and his professional reaction to my documents reassured me of the solidity of my case. "Mrs. Lillian, this is one of the most complete family fraud cases I've seen in years," he told me as he examined the photos and documents. "Your daughter-in-law was not an amateur. This is a sophisticated criminal operation with multiple potential victims. They are going to prosecute her for several federal crimes." I explained in detail the entire chronology of events from the first innocent purchases to the discovery of the plan to declare my mental incapacity. The detective took notes meticulously, occasionally asking specific questions about dates, amounts, and witness testimonies. What do you think your son's reaction will be when he finds out about all this? He asked me with professional sensitivity. It was the question I had been avoiding facing for weeks, but I knew it was inevitable. Thomas has been completely manipulated by her for years, I admitted with pain. He will probably blame me for destroying his marriage before accepting that his wife is a criminal. As if I had summoned him with my words, my phone rang at that moment. It was Thomas, and his voice sounded angrier than I had ever heard it. Mom, what did you do? The police just arrested Diana. The neighbors called me saying there were patrol cars at your house. How could you call the police on your own family? Son, I need you to come home immediately, I told him with all the patience I could muster. There are things you need to know about your wife, things that will hurt you but that you need to hear. But he didn't want to hear explanations, only shouted accusations and reproaches. You are a bitter, vengeful old woman. Diana was right about you. Since Dad died, you became a horrible person. His words were like stabs, but I had already expected this reaction. Diana had spent years preparing my son for this moment, filling his mind with venom against me. Thomas, come home now, I insisted. Bring a lawyer if you want, but come and look at all the evidence before judging me. Your wife is not who you think she is. I hung up before he could respond, knowing he needed time to process the information without more shouting and accusations. As I awaited my son's inevitable arrival, Detective Harrison explained the legal process that would follow. Diana will be charged with credit card fraud, aggravated theft, money laundering, and after today's incident, threats with a deadly weapon and resisting arrest. She's looking at a minimum prison sentence of 5 to 10 years. And my money? I asked, although I already knew that was the least important question in this whole tragedy. We will have to track all recoverable assets. You will likely recover a significant portion, especially if we can locate the buyers of the illegally sold items. An hour later, Thomas arrived, accompanied by Steve, a young lawyer who worked at the same company where my son was employed. Both entered my house with hostile attitudes, clearly prepared to confront me for what they saw as unforgivable family betrayal. Mom, you better have a very good explanation for all this, Thomas said without even greeting me. Steve says you could go to jail for making a false report against Diana. Do you really want to destroy your whole family for money? Instead of answering verbally, I simply pointed toward the table where all the evidence was still laid out. Sit down and look at all this before you say another word, I told them with an authority that surprised even Detective Harrison. After you see the evidence, you can comment on who is destroying this family. The silence that followed as Thomas and Steve examined the documents was one of the longest moments of my life. I could see my son's face gradually change from indignation to confusion and finally to horror when he grasped the magnitude of his wife's deception. This cannot be real, Thomas whispered as he read his own descriptions in Diana's plans. She loves me. She tells me every day. She couldn't have been faking all this time. But the evidence was irrefutable. Every document and every photo told a story of calculated manipulation and systematic theft. Steve, with his legal training, was the first to understand the full implications. Thomas, this is evidence of an extensive criminal operation. Your wife not only conned your mother, but she was planning to expand her activities to other victims. This could have made you an unwitting accomplice to multiple felonies. It was then that my son finally broke down, all his arrogance and hostility evaporating as he faced the reality that his marriage had been an elaborate sham. Mom, I didn't know anything about this, he said, his voice broken. I thought she really loved me. I thought you had changed after Dad's death. I know, son, I replied, finally reaching out to hug him as I hadn't been able to in months. She is an expert manipulator. This is not your fault. But I knew that the emotional wounds of this betrayal would take years to heal, if they ever healed completely. Diana's trial began 6 months after her arrest, and throughout that time my son Thomas had been undergoing a painful process of personal reconstruction. The sessions with the therapist I recommended helped him understand how he had been systematically manipulated, but seeing his self-esteem shattered was almost as painful as having been robbed by his wife. Mom, how could I not have noticed? He would constantly ask me during our weekly conversations we had established to rebuild our relationship. I lived with her every day. How could I have been so blind? It was a question that had no easy answer because Diana had been an accomplished actress who had studied every weakness of my son to exploit it. During the pre-trial investigation, we discovered that I had not been her first victim. Investigators found evidence that she had conned at least 3 other older women in different cities using the same method, seducing vulnerable men to gain access to their widowed mother's finances. She was a serial predator who had perfected her technique over years. The district attorney, a man named Alan Stevens, explained to me that my case was the most complete they had against her. "Mrs. Lillian, thanks to the evidence you collected, we can prosecute for the full range of crimes. Without your meticulous investigation, she probably would have escaped with a minimal sentence, claiming it was a family misunderstanding." The day of the trial, I sat in the front row of the courtroom wearing my best coral-colored dress, the same one I had worn to Robert's funeral. I wanted to show dignity and strength to represent all the elderly women who had been victimized by predators like Diana. Thomas sat beside me, offering the support I hadn't had during the months of abuse. When they brought Diana in handcuffed and dressed in the orange prison uniform, I was surprised to see how much she had changed. There was no trace left of the elegant, manipulative woman I had known. Her hair was dull and unkempt. She had lost weight, and her skin had the grayish pallor of someone who doesn't see the sun. Prison had been hard on her. During the prosecutor's testimony, I heard for the first time all the details of her previous crimes. In Phoenix, she had conned a 72-year-old widow named Dorothy, stealing more than $60,000 before disappearing when the woman started asking questions. In San Antonio, she had seduced a divorced man to access his deceased mother's inheritance, forging documents to transfer property into her name. "The pattern is consistent," the prosecutor explained, showing photographs and documents to the jury. "The defendant identifies vulnerable victims, studies their emotional weaknesses, builds relationships based on elaborate lies, and then systematically exploits their financial resources until she is discovered or until she exhausts the available funds." When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with my head held high. For 2 hours, I detailed every aspect of the scam, from the first innocent purchases to the discovery of her plan to declare me mentally incapacitated. As I spoke, I could see some members of the jury looking at me with compassion, especially the older women who probably identified with my situation. "How did you feel when you discovered that your daughter-in-law was reselling the items bought with your money?" the prosecutor asked me. "I felt betrayed, not only financially, but emotionally," I answered in a clear voice. "This woman not only stole my life savings, but she destroyed the trust I had in my own family and poisoned the relationship with my only son." Diana's defense tried to paint her as a victim of circumstances, claiming she had grown up in poverty and that her actions were motivated by economic desperation. Her lawyer, a young and inexperienced woman, tried to argue that I had authorized all the expenses and that it was a family misunderstanding, escalated by my senile paranoia. But when they presented the evidence of her previous victims and her detailed plans for future scams, it became clear that there was no desperation but criminal calculation. Her notebooks, with profiles of potential victims and manipulation strategies, demonstrated a sophisticated criminal mind, not a desperate woman making impulsive decisions. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when the prosecutor played the recording I had secretly made during our last conversation before calling the police. Using an application on my phone that Angela had taught me, I had captured Diana's complete confession about her scam methods and her future plans. "That money was wasted on you," her voice was heard through the courtroom speakers. "An old woman who lives like a beggar, having a fortune in the bank. At least I put it to productive use." The contempt in her voice was so evident that several jury members exchanged looks of disgust. When it was time for Diana to testify in her own defense, her performance was pathetic compared to the masterful manipulations she had used with me. She tried to cry and appear vulnerable, but she had lost her magic touch. The lies she told were easily refuted by the evidence, and her occasional arrogance seeped through her victim mask. "Why did you have detailed information about other elderly women in the neighborhood if you weren't planning to con more victims?" the prosecutor asked her during the cross-examination. That was just curiosity," she responded weakly. "I like to get to know the neighbors, but when they showed her specific notes about the savings and vulnerabilities of those women, she couldn't offer any credible explanation." The jury's deliberations lasted barely 4 hours. When they returned with the verdict, I could see on their faces that justice had prevailed. "Guilty of first-degree credit card fraud," announced the jury foreman. "Guilty of aggravated theft. Guilty of money laundering. guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud. The sentence came 2 weeks later, 8 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 4 years, plus 5 years of supervised release and the obligation to restitute all stolen funds with interest. It was a complete victory, but I knew that no sentence could fully repair the emotional damage she had caused my family. After the trial, Thomas and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. He moved temporarily into my house while he processed the divorce and reorganized his life. "Mom, I am so sorry I doubted you," he told me one night as we had coffee in my kitchen. "I should have trusted you from the beginning." "Son, she was an expert manipulator," I replied, stroking his hand. "This is not your fault. The important thing is that now we know the truth and we can move forward." But I saw in his eyes that the emotional scars would take a long time to heal completely. With the restitution ordered by the court and the forced sale of Diana's assets, I managed to recover approximately $75,000 of the $85,000 I had lost. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to maintain my financial security during my golden years. 6 months after the sentencing, I made a decision that surprised everyone. I sold my house and moved to a retirement community on the coast, 3 hours away from all the painful memories. I wanted a fresh start, surrounded by new people who didn't know my history and saw me simply as Lillian, not as the victim of a family scam. In my new community, I established a small sewing workshop where I teach other elderly women the techniques I learned during decades of work. My dresses in golden, silver, and coral tones have become popular among the residents who need elegant clothing for special events. I also began giving talks on scam prevention aimed at senior citizens. My story has become a powerful educational tool, helping other women recognize the signs of manipulations before they become victims. The community where I live now has become my true home. I have genuine friends like Vanessa, an ex-nurse who helps me with my educational talks, and Angela, my old neighbor, who moved here last year to be close to me. Every Tuesday we organize a book club, and every Friday we have dance nights where widows like me rediscover the joy of moving to the rhythm of music without worrying about other people's opinions. My financial situation has completely stabilized. Diana's restitution combined with the sale of my previous house and my income from the workshop allows me to live comfortably without depending on anyone. I have established an emergency fund that I will never again allow to be touched by outside hands, and I have created a detailed will that protects Thomas's future without creating opportunities for future manipulators. 6 months ago, I received a letter from the federal prison where Diana is serving her sentence. It was a pathetic final attempt at manipulation, where she begged for my forgiveness and claimed to have found God during her incarceration. She promised to give me back every penny if I wrote a letter to the judge asking for a reduction of her sentence. The letter went straight into the trash without a response. Some wounds are too deep for forgiveness, and some criminals are too dangerous to deserve second chances. What satisfies me the most is seeing how Thomas has healed and grown from the experience. He is no longer the manipulable man he was during his marriage to Diana. He has developed a sharper instinct for detecting falsehood and manipulation, and his relationship with Maricela is based on mutual honesty and genuine respect. He asked me to be his best woman at the wedding, an honor I accepted with tears of joy. My workshop has become famous in the region for the wedding gowns I create. Every stitch carries decades of experience, but also the wisdom of a woman who learned to value authenticity over appearances. My clients come from distant towns seeking not only a beautiful dress, but also the blessing of a woman who survived betrayal and found peace on the other side of the pain. Robert appears in my dreams occasionally, always smiling and nodding in approval. In the most recent dream, we were dancing in our kitchen like we did when we were young, and he whispered, "Lillian, I always knew you were stronger than you thought you were. I am proud of how you protected our legacy and found your own happiness." This afternoon, as the sun sets over the ocean from my small balcony, I reflect on the lessons learned during these transformative years. The deepest betrayal can become the most complete liberation, the most intense pain can forge the most valuable wisdom, and the most desperate loneliness can open doors to more authentic connections than we ever imagined possible. To the women who may be experiencing similar situations, I say this: it is never too late to stand up for yourself. You are never too old to start over, and you are never too alone to find support in unexpected places. Dignity has no age, justice knows no temporal limits, and happiness can flourish even in the autumn of our lives. My name is Lillian. I am 74 years old and I am finally free.